Hello, salam, bula,
Hello.
and g'day. Michael Gallis here on A1 TV, Healthy Living. Magic Monday. We love Mondays. We've got a great week ahead, and it's so exciting to see what's going to happen throughout the week. Thanks very much for joining us. And we've got a very special guest, our first guest from America, Ari Cohen. Now, Ari is an amazing man. I've met a lot of people around the world, and I'm pretty sure, Ari, you're the most intelligent that I've certainly met. Now, I'm going to have to read this so I don't make a mistake here. He is the Professor of Political Science in Lincoln, Nebraska at the University of Nebraska. He is an author. He's a hero of Round Table, inspirational speaker, and a blogger. Ari, do you have any time to sleep? As well as a family man as well, most importantly, a husband and a father. Do you get any sleep, Ari?
Not as much as I used to in my younger days, and I miss it.
Thanks very much for joining us all the way from Nebraska in America. Now, you are a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska. Very impressive title there, and a lot of people steer away from politics, but you've gone into lecturing about it. As a young boy in school growing up, were you always interested in politics?
No, I really was not. It's an interesting situation. I got into the study of political science in a little bit of a roundabout way. When I was in high school, I got really interested in human rights, and I got involved with my high school Amnesty International group. And as a result of that, it got me interested in public policy questions and issues of politics. I carried that over into university, where I studied in what was called a public affairs college at Michigan State University. And I read there about political philosophy, about international relations, international affairs, because I believed that I was going to go to law school. And I thought that I would study international human rights law. And I was talking to one of my professors, and I explained what I was interested in, and he said, everybody goes to law school. You should do something else, right? He said you can also affect a lot of change by becoming a teacher. And I started looking into it, and I started researching it. And the more I read and the more I studied, the more interested I became in becoming a university educator, like some of my phenomenal professors when I was a student.
And always grown up in Nebraska?
No, this is my new home. I guess I should say. I mean, I still think of it as new, though I've been here now 13 years. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, though I actually grew up across the river in Ontario, Canada, and then went to college in Michigan, then graduate school in North Carolina. I taught at my first job in Virginia, and now here in Nebraska. So my neighbors always remind me I am not a Nebraska native. I'm a transplant, but I love it. I never imagined I would live here. It's dead center in the middle of the country. Nobody ever knows where we are or why, although we're attracting a lot of attention this year because of the election. But I love it. It's a great place to be, and the university is really a world-class one.
And you said you grew up, or you spent some time in Canada. Is that where you were a small child when you were growing up?
Yeah, 10 years from the age of 2 until the age of 12. Grew up there, and my dad just happened to have a job there, so we moved there and then moved back. But it was a terrific place to grow up. Really loved it.
Yeah, we've got a lot of viewers from Canada. Big shout out to them on through Relays in A1 TV. Which town did you grow up in?
Windsor, Ontario, right on the border, right across the river from Detroit.
And how have you found that? How old were you when you moved from Canada?
I moved back to the States. So I was born in Detroit. I moved to Canada, and then moved back to the States when I was 12, and have lived in the U.S. since then.
And what's your memories of Canada as compared to America? I hear it's two different places.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it was really like living in suburban America in some ways, right? It's I mean, because it's a small city just adjacent to a big American city, In some ways, people drove back and forth all the time, and so we did. It wasn't like living in Toronto or something like that, or Ottawa. It was really kind of adjacent to the United States,
Yeah.
but it was kind of small city living, which is which has so many benefits to growing up. There's a real strong sense of community. Spent lots of time playing outside with the neighbors, and I come by my love of ice hockey, honestly, because I really grew up in it. So I get there's a little multicultural background piece that I feel like I earned by living over there.
Fantastic. And Detroit, fair to say, when you were growing up too, it still would have been the automotive flavour of America. And how's that compared to where you are in Nebraska? Nebraska, rural town?
Yeah. So, of course, Detroit, Michigan, and a number of cities in Michigan, Lansing, Saginaw, Flint, heavy industry. The automotive industry really is the backbone of those places, and this was the case when I was growing up there as well. We had family members who were line workers at the Ford plant and all of that sort of thing. The opposite in some sense is the case here in Lincoln. Lincoln actually has a very mixed economy. It's the capital of the state, so you have state government. Just outside of the city, you have agriculture all the way west for the next 400 miles. So it's a huge agricultural state: corn, soybeans, ranching, cattle ranching. Those are the main things going on over there. And of course, also Nebraska is really well known for the insurance industry, right? So Mutual of Omaha, Mutual of America, these kinds of big insurance agencies are in Nebraska as well, but largely rural and agricultural. Yeah.
And yourself, not just a professor, but also an author, and 3 of your books. And I tried to get one, but it was very difficult at one stage. And you've just prompted me. I've got to get back onto that and get some of these books down here in Australia. You've written books in relation to In Defence of Human Rights, Untangling Heroism, Unlikely Heroes, the place of the Holocaust rescuers in research and teaching. And you're also motivation speaker with the Matt Langdon-led Hero of the Round Table. What makes a hero, do you think, in everyday humans?
It's such a good question. I started researching heroism, I guess probably in 2006. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about this. But, from my perspective, there are lots of different ways that people can act heroically. And to my mind, the kind of backbone that you need in each one of these cases, or the thing that you see over and over again, is that heroes take a risk or they make a sacrifice. That happens in basically every case of real dynamic heroic behavior. And they do it on behalf of usually someone else or some other community rather than simply for themselves, right? Taking a risk just for myself is not heroic, but doing it for somebody else is the case. And quite often they're motivated by a principle, right? Or a belief system that says, I know that this is dangerous, but I feel that I have to do it. Right? I wouldn't be the same person, or I wouldn't understand myself in the same way if I didn't take this action, no matter what the consequences or the costs are for me. So those, I think, are the 3 big things that you see over and over again in hero stories, whether they're the everyday heroic actions of people today, the person who jumps into the lake to save the drowning child, or whether it's the rescuers, the non-Jewish rescuers of Jews in the Holocaust, or the Hutu rescuers of Tutsi during the Rwandan genocide in 1994, or whether we go all the way back, as in the case of my book, to the ancient Greek stories, right, the Homeric epics, and you read about those situations, or you read the Platonic dialogues about the heroism of Socrates, the philosopher, right? In all of those cases, this is what I find most fascinating, is you see the same hallmarks of heroic behavior over and over again.
And as you said, it's not about a firefighter or a policeman, is it? Everyone can be a hero in themselves if they're standing up, basically, for what they believe in, which around the world at the moment, we really need people to stand up for themselves and for their community and make their voices heard, don't we?
Yeah, that's what I believe. I think, and this builds off of research by a very famous psychologist named Philip Zimbardo, who was for many years at Stanford University in California. And the idea here is that everybody has the capacity to act heroically. That there isn't some hero gene or something like that, right? So that only certain people are born to be heroes. But we believe, and we have been working to educate people and to train people, we believe that people can be trained to take heroic action. You can learn how to do this, at least to make it much more likely that you're the person who takes heroic action when that moment arises, right? And in every case, heroism is emergent, right? It's something that happens in a split second. It's an instantaneous thing, and you have to have already done a lot of that background work in order to be the kind of person who acts heroically. So, there are organizations like the Heroic Imagination Project, which people can find online, that do a lot of this training work. And there's, of course, the Hero Roundtable, which is a great event that normally happens 2 or 3 times a year when people can get together in person. And we feature speakers from really across the spectrum, right? So it's not one kind of heroic behavior. It's people who do all kinds of different things. Like, for example, yourself, you were, in fact, a speaker at one of those events. And your story, I think, is one of those inspiring stories as well, about how we can be community-minded, right? And how we can take actions in our local communities that impact people in really big ways.
Yeah, and it's really important for people who are watching, and we've got a great viewing audience from around Australia and across the world: Pakistan, India, Canada, as we mentioned, New Zealand, UAE, down into Indonesia as well, and Southeast Asia. And throughout all my interviews and all my programs so far this year, Ari, we just encourage people to really to back themselves and to never give up in relation to whatever they are doing, and really to become a leader within their local community, because, as you said, you don't know where that ripple effect's going to end up, do you?
That's exactly it. You're so right. And this idea about really putting yourself forward, and believing that there are things that you can do in your everyday life, I think that's hugely important, right? You don't have to be Gandhi or Martin Luther King, right? You can be Michael and Ari, and make these big changes in just those small decisions that we take every day. We don't know what the ripple effect will be until we take those actions, but we know for sure that when you take those actions, you start to see those ripple effects. And if you never take those actions, there is no chance that you will see those ripple effects.
Yeah, 100%. If you don't do anything, nothing's going to happen, is it? You've got to make the first step. And as you discuss, and those of us that do start to follow their beliefs, there's plenty of failures along the way, and it's you've got to really, I've found, you've got to accept that is going to happen and put yourself out there to allow that to happen. And then obviously you learn from those failures to continue to get stronger and to continue to follow your goal too, isn't it? Failure is such an important part of the process.
That's right. We're not all going to be successful all the time. And one of the things that we have to teach people is how to take those actions, how to start taking risks in meaningful but appropriate ways, right? So something that we teach people all the time is to learn how to do proper risk assessment, right? What are good risks and what are excessively dangerous risks? And if you take a good risk and you fail, you've learned something. If you take a good risk and you succeed, you've learned something. But you also don't want to take a massive risk and fail and never be able to take a risk again, right? So we do learn unquestionably from our successes as well as from our challenges, things that don't go the way we plan. But it's really important, I mean, I talked for a minute about that great case that people always bring up about the person who jumps into the pond to save the drowning child. Well, if you don't know how to swim, don't jump in.
Yeah, true.
Right? I mean, there's no clearer example. You're not going to help. You can't help if you don't know how to swim. So what do? We tell you, go learn how to swim.
Yeah.
Right? Take a first aid course.
Yeah.
Learn how to perform CPR. Do a lifeguard training class at your local swimming pool or whatever the case may be. People who have that kind of training are so much more likely to act when the need arises and to be successful.
Yeah, yeah, and the acceptable risk, as you said, is most important, and common sense, which leads me to my next point that we're all talking about all over the world, is relating to the US election. And as you said, you're in the middle of America, Nebraska, which I would think is Trump town. And what is your view, firstly, on his reign as president, and then secondly, in relation to the way two big crises that have impacted around the world from America is the American government's handling of the COVID coronavirus epidemic, and also the protesting through the Black Lives Matter. So now we haven't got 4 hours, Ari, unfortunately. But firstly, how have you seen him as a president?
So I think that what most people will tell you is that any president has successes and failures. And then the question is, how do you judge a president? Well, you look at how many successes versus how many failures. To my mind, it's very easy for people to say in these very, very polarized moments that there are no successes. It's all failure. Or on the other hand, it's all successes and it's the best we've ever seen. Well, obviously the truth is in the middle. I, on balance, believe that unfortunately we have seen more challenges than we have seen successes. I think that for people who are watching who are not in the United States, in terms of foreign policy, the president has had some successes. I'm thinking, for example, just right now of the way in which we've had recent normalization deals between, for example, Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and now Sudan. So that's a big deal. That's great. On the other hand, you have to balance that against what is clearly a kind of loss of American prestige and loss of leadership around the world. The idea that people look to the United States first and foremost when something arises like the COVID crisis, those sorts of things are very much not up here as they used to be, but are now down here. And so people are looking around the world to other countries first. And so, America has had lots of challenges in relating to its traditional allies around the world, in keeping up its agreements, or removing ourselves from them. And those are unquestionably things that will have to change for the United States if we want to be back on a sure footing internationally. Domestically, you point to the COVID crisis and you point to the Black Lives Matter movement. Obviously, those are huge challenges that our country is facing. And there are, I think, many, many millions of people, tens of millions of people who think that the administration as it currently is constituted simply is not up to addressing those challenges in any meaningful way. And I think that, when people are looking to the election next week, those are front of mind. I think that the president was really hoping that the economy would be front of mind, but that's no longer the case. The American stock market was going great guns for quite a long time during the first 3 years of the Trump presidency, and while the stock market is in some sense leveled off over the last couple of months, we have massive unemployment. We have, without having control of the virus, it's very, very difficult to have the economy back on a sure footing. And so we have people who are out of work. We have people who are living in situations of food insecurity. We have kids who can't be in school, and all of those sorts of things are going to be front of mind in a way that I think is detrimental to the president's reelection chances.
And talk us through him getting elected in the first place. Was it a massive protest vote against, like the Clintons and politicians in general, or did people really resonate with what he had to say in relation to making America great, was his slogan, and returning America to Americans?
Bit of both, truthfully. In both cases, he doesn't have that to run on in 2020 in the way that he had it in 2016. In 2020, he was facing an opponent who was unpopular in Hillary Clinton, and he himself was also unpopular, but in two unpopular opponents, he was least unpopular. Today, that's not the case. Joe Biden is quite popular. And so the tactics that worked against Hillary Clinton he's not seeing the same success as far as we can tell against Biden. And also the message of doing all this work to make America great works when you haven't done anything, right? When you're the challenger that nobody knows about. But when you've been the president for 4 years and you say, I want to make America great, people say, well, what have you been doing, right? I mean, how's it gone? And so, I live in Nebraska, and farmers have been massively negatively impacted by the trade dispute with China that the Trump administration inaugurated a few years ago. And as a result, the government has had to send bailout money to keep the farmers afloat. And I think that, there are some people who are willing to say, well, we needed to change the way we engage with the Chinese, and whatever the case might be. But for how long, right? For how long will people be content with that message? And so even in a place like Nebraska, which, as you rightly said, is a deep red state, right? Very pro-Trump, very pro-Republican. There are real cracks that are being seen here. So, for example, we're divided. The state is divided into 3 electoral districts because, of course, we have the Electoral College. Nebraska is one of those very unusual states. We do not award all of our Electoral College votes at once. Yeah. We do them based on congressional districts. It's only us and the state of Maine. Everybody else, if you win the popular vote in your state, you get all of that state's electoral votes, not here. So in the 2nd congressional district, which encompasses most of Omaha, which is the big city, it looks like that electoral college vote is actually going to go to Joe Biden, according to the polls, not to Donald Trump. And that would be that's only happened. It happened with Obama in 2008, but before that, it was decades since that last happened. So we're starting to see those the kind of creaks and cracks in that kind of, even in a deep red state like Nebraska.
Michael Gallis on A1 TV, Monday night, Healthy Living, and we've got a special guest all the way from America talking all things US election, Ari Cohen. He is a professor of political science in Lincoln, in Nebraska in America, and we really thank Ari for his time in discussing American politics and his life with us. The other thing that astounded me a little bit, which I wasn't too aware of before the last election, is that it's not compulsory for Americans to vote.
Yeah, that's true. And historically, we don't do a great job of it. It's a really interesting phenomenon because we really pride ourselves on, being this sort of democratic republic. But our voter turnout is historically not great. It's really, really bad in off-year elections, right? So when there is not a presidential contest to really galvanize people and get them to the polls, it's really quite low. And even in election years, I always tell my students, if you look at any election and you say, well, who really won this election? The winner of every election did not vote. Yeah. Right? That's the person who got the most votes, did not vote. And look, it's a real problem. In part, it's not easy to vote here. And I think that, and that's something that ultimately has to be remedied. If we really care about democratic processes, it has to be easier to vote.
Yeah.
Election day here is not a national holiday, so you have to carve out time to go vote. We don't have this thing where an election, you can vote anytime before a certain date. Historically it has been on one day. Now, of course, with the coronavirus pandemic, we do see a lot more early voting and voting by mail. So we're likely to see massively expanded numbers of voters. I think voter turnout will be much, much higher this year than in years past. But even so, it's not universal.
Trump and Clinton was, as you said, they were two unpopular choices. So was that why was there such a high rate of people not voting, because they didn't have a positive choice?
I think that's part of it. But also, I think that unfortunately, we see that, for some candidates, the strategy actually is not necessarily to encourage the most voters you can for yourself, but to discourage people from voting, right? So there was a concerted effort to convince people to stay home. And to not go vote. So if you're looking at historically democratic communities or districts, whether it's the Black community or whatever the case might be, if you could say to them, this person doesn't have your best interest at heart, and we know you're not going to vote for us, so why don't you just stay home, right? And so there were efforts using social media, for example, to discourage people from registering to vote and from going to the polls. And if it's already not easy to go to the polls, because you have to take time off of work or whatever the case might be, then it's a quick hop, skip, and a jump to just not participating.
And you mentioned there that how have you sort of assessed the fallout and the response to the Black Lives Matter protests that have really reverberated all around the world?
Look, it's a huge movement. It's very, very important. It's very unfortunately very timely, right? It's unfortunate that we're living in the year 2020 and people have to make the assertion that Black Lives Matter rather than it being an obvious given. But here we are, and I think that one of the unfortunate challenges here is that you have not simply Black Lives Matter protesters who are out and protesting peacefully, but also you have people who join into those protests and change the context of them. And then, of course, that shows up on television. And so now it has become a much more polarized thing. I think that initially it didn't need to be so polarized. I think everybody agrees that, for example, police officers have a particular special responsibility to take care with the communities that they're policing, right? And when they find themselves in a situation where force is used, it has to be rare and it has to be, the bar has to be very, very high and people have to be very, very careful. So when we see situations over and over again where that's not the case, then the protesting really makes a lot of sense. And we need to get ourselves to a place where we're not in this situation anymore. Now, when we add into that elements of looting and setting fire to buildings and whatever the case might be, from people who are not part of this movement, but who have joined in order to participate in this, then you can see it becoming more polarized, right? And now people are hoping that they can say, well, it's not the case that Black Lives Matter is a nonviolent movement. In fact, Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the anarchists, they're all working together to undermine our society. And this sort of thing, it's not true on its face. For people who have been to, especially in the early days of these protests in the summer here, that clearly wasn't the case. But when people are simply at home in their suburban, their nice suburban homes, and they're watching it on the Fox News channel or whatever, then I think the situation looks very, very different and frightening, right? And that frightening situation is something that people, unfortunately, politicians are able to use to their own advantage, right? And to say, you should be afraid, and we're going to have law and order, and we're going to make sure that they don't come get you.
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting year in America, hasn't it? Even for Americans, Ari, and we wish you all best. Last word on the election with Trump and Biden. What are you hoping for as a country?
Well,
Not necessarily
yeah.
yourself.
I'll tell you, we're hoping for a lot of people to vote. We're hoping that nobody is turned away from voting or prohibited from voting. We're hoping for, this is an amazing thing I never thought I would say. We're hoping for a free and fair election, and we're hoping that the people who are the candidates will accept the results of the election. I never thought that I would say such a thing in the United States of America or in any country that has hundreds of years of history of democratically electing its leaders and in peaceful transitions of power. But here we are, unfortunately, we're at a moment where there are actually a lot of people who are concerned about the transition. If the president should lose, will he accept the loss? He has said, unfortunately, publicly, he said many times that the only way he'll lose is if there's voter fraud, which there's no evidence of, if people cheat and so on. And what we hope for is that the election goes forward as planned and that everybody has their voice heard and that the results are accepted by everyone. Yeah,
and that's sadly, Ari, that's just plain and simple democracy, isn't it? That we all hope for in all parts of the world, and it's really disappointing, and I'm sure it's a little bit embarrassing for Americans to say that and to think that, and that's the sense we're getting here in Australia as well. So fingers crossed that win, lose or draw, that both candidates accept the results, and the next 4 years it's up to the new president, whoever gets in, to hopefully heal. It seems a lot of fractured parts of America at the moment. It's not united from looking outside from America, and that's a huge challenge of the next president to try and unite America again.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of work. And the rhetoric that I have been most grateful to hear, not just as a political scientist who studies these things, but as a citizen, I've been very gratified to hear Joe Biden in particular talk about being a president for all Americans, right? Being a proud Democratic candidate, but hoping to be a president for all Americans. I have been, over the last 4 years, deeply uncomfortable with the idea that there are red states and blue states, that there are Democrat cities, right? The kind of rhetoric that we hear, unfortunately, still today from President Trump, because I think that you never get to the situation that you're describing, right? The situation of everybody as Americans coming together with a common project. We don't get that if we continue to think of ourselves in this very polarized manner. So I'm really hopeful that whatever happens next week, that we see the United States really changing its tone and changing its tack over the coming 4 years.
Ari, it's been a pleasure having you on A1 TV. Ari Cohen we've been speaking to, our special guest from America, University of Nebraska, Professor of Political Science. And we're going to sign off, Ari, with a bit of Urdu. I think I made up a couple of these words, but brings a bit of joy to the end of our interview. So if you're happy to follow along, do you know anything about Urdu?
Just a friend of mine who is a speaker and sometimes teaches a few words to my kids. So let me say before you do this, thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure, and it's great to see you.
That pleasure's all ours, Ari. And maybe you can ask him. I've had some conflicting reports about Mazi Karoo. So could you ask him what Mazi Karoo means, and is it a word? Because that's how I sign off. Mazi Karoo?
I will let you know.
Are you happy to follow along, Ari? Give a shout out, Mazi Karoo.
If that's what it means.
And Shaba Shaba. And Morday, we give a big Morday to the Fiji community. And you can follow along with this one, Ari. This is an Australian one. Hopefully Maddie's taught you this one. Hooroo.
Hooroo. All right.
It's been a pleasure having you on A1 TV, Healthy Living. Thanks again to everyone's support across Australia and around the world. The only reason that this show does so well is thanks to you at home and on Facebook and Facebook Live, listening in and watching us on YouTube. We thank you for tuning in. I know you would have got a lot out of tonight's interview with Ari Cohen in relation to not just politics and the Trump-Biden race, but also about life and about being a hero and about standing up for yourself and making your voice heard and being a leader in your community. Your community starts at your house, okay, and it starts at your street, and it starts at your suburb. But it's really important that you continue to follow your dreams and to never give up, but also to be a positive role model for those around you. So thanks for joining in. I look forward to have a great week. I look forward to seeing you all back on Healthy Living on A1 TV, 8:30, the place to be.